Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this edition of the Inspirational Book Club. My name is William Porter. The meeting today is an audio-visual of the story that we're doing this month. And afterwards, we'll have discussion and questions. So take a look at this. Welcome back. The last time we met telling our story, it ended with Mincy taking Sandra to the hospital to be examined for severe pain that was occurring in her abdomen. After the examination, Sandra was told that she had a malfunctioning liver, due in part to the accident she had while driving from the airport in Minneapolis to a downtown hotel. While Mincy tried to comfort her, Sandra took her newly revealed illness very badly. This was an understandable response because the doctor had given her little chance of survival unless a replacement liver could be found, and found soon. Yes, she was in dire need of a liver transplant. Mincy was a big help to Sandra when she first returned to Detroit after her Damascus Road experience, highlighted by the incident she had. She was affected almost as much as Sandra about the news she had received from the doctor, but she promised her that she would give her all the support that she needed. One thing that Mincy did to help Sandra was to pick up a wheelchair, plus a fresh pair of crutches from a local medical supply store. Sandra's rehab was going well. She didn't even use her wheelchair after 6 weeks, and she had begun to use her crutches on a limited basis. After that, she slowly began to walk normally again. It was at that time when she started planning for her trip to Bermuda. Sandra arranged with Mincy to take her to the airport for her weekend trip. When Mincy talked to her on the phone only a week prior to her scheduled flight, she brought along some bad news. Matthew had passed away because of complications from the injuries he sustained in his fall from a ladder at home. When Mincy called Sandra and she answered, Mincy greeted her. "Hello, Sandra."
"Oh, hello, Mincy. How are you?"
"Not good. Matthew passed away last night."
"Oh, no. Mincy. Matthew? Gone?"
Sandra reacted to what she had just heard with tears quickly filling her eyes. After the initial shock of the news she had just received, Sandra paused for just a moment, not knowing what to say. She was devastated about the news that the only father figure she had ever known was now gone. She then uttered,
I just don't know what to say, Mincy. I grew to love Matthew very much."
Mincy tried to comfort her by saying, "You know, Sandra, Matthew suddenly became ill over the last 2 days, and I don't think he fully recovered from his accident. You know, Sandra, I feel so guilty now since I was the one who wanted him to hang those Christmas lighting fixtures near the top of our house in the first place. But you know what? Sandra, he's in a better place now." Sandra didn't want to express her true feelings about Matthew, but she never quite understood someone being in a better place after they die. She just didn't have the faith to effectively deal with the loss of Matthew, someone she really loved and respected. Sandra did express her feelings to Mincy one day prior to the final services for her husband.
"Mincy, I envy your strength at a time like this. I just couldn't be as strong as you are. And do you know why, Mincy? It's because I just can't accept the idea that he's in a better place. Where is this place? Oh, I'm sorry to be carrying on like this, Mincy, but to me he's gone. He's gone, and I feel horrible about it."
Sandra had communicated her feelings to Missy as the tears began to flow. But Missy tried to hold her up. She replied, "Now, Sandra, I feel the same way you feel. That is, I'm hurt that he's gone from us. But you have to grow in the strength you're saying I have. And believe me, I've grown a lot over the last few years. Anyway, while I hurt like you do, I've grown to depend on what the Scripture says about those who have left us, and that is, they are still with us in spirit." That's what Jesus says in effect, and I believe it's in John the 11th chapter and the 26th verse. And that is, if we believe in him, we will never die, which means that our spirit will never die. Missy tried her best to explain to Sandra that she should not focus so much on the physical part of Matthew. That is, his physical body, because that part of him was lifeless. But instead, asking for God's help to realize that part of him, the spiritual part, still lives on in another dimension. Okay, I think we're all back, and we just saw the audio visual on Losing Matthew Part 1. That was the title of the audio visual. So, again, welcome to the Inspirational Book Club and Storytelling Time. And the story title is On Losing Matthew Part 1, Confidence in Death, a peace that surpasses all understanding. The first story is taken from chapter 7, On the Beach. And it comes from pages 115 to 121 in the book Heaven Can't Wait, or Can It? The sequel. And the story theme is a peace that passes all understanding. And the agenda is for this new Inspirational Book Club, January 7, 2023. It's the 26th meeting, by the way, and it's the first meeting of the year. And we've already had testimonies, and we've just seen the audio visual. And now we're in part 2, where we have discussion point and questions. And then we'll have announcements and then adjournment. This month we're starting something, a little different, and that is the PTR. And the PTR stands for Points to Remember. And there are 3 points I'd like for you to remember. First, Missy's faith, then Minnie's peace, and I know this is a new person, and I'll talk to you about this a little bit later, and then Sandra's anxiety. And this is the discussion point taken from the text, and I'll read it as follows. Sandra didn't want to express her true feelings about Matthew in his passing, but she never quite understood someone being in a better place after they die. And Sandra did express her feelings to Missy one day prior to the found services for her husband. Sandra said, "Missy, I envy your strength at a time like this. I just can't accept the idea that he's in a better place. To me, he's gone, and I feel horrible about it," she said to her friend as the tears began to flow. But Missy tried to hold her up. Missy replied, "Now, Sandra, I feel the same way you feel. That is, I'm hurt that he's gone from us. But you have to grow in the strength you're talking about that I have. And believe me, I've grown a lot over the last few years. Anyway, while I hurt like you do, I've grown to depend on what the Scripture says about those who have left us. And that is that they are still with us in spirit. That's what Jesus says in John the 11th chapter and the 26th verse, that if we believe in him, we will never die, which means that our spirit will never die. Sandra replied, "Missy, I admire your strength at a time like this, your confidence in death. So the story summary is this. Missy was at peace in Matthew's passing because she felt Matthew was still alive in spirit, which was what her faith promoted. Missy being in peace at such a sad time was because of her strength in the faith, the strength that Sandra didn't have at the time. Missy's feelings were the same as Sandra's. As Missy says in the text, now Sandra, I feel the same way you feel. That is, I'm hurt that he's gone from us. So, in our story, because of the spirit inside of Missy, her outward response was different than that of Sandra. So, the first question I'd like to ask you all is this. Why did Missy seem at peace in the death of her husband Matthew when Sandra obviously didn't share the same feeling? And this might be a rather easy question to answer. Does anyone want to give us the answer to that? To get us started? If not, I can kind of give a review of it.
Because of her faith. I mean, I think that's the most obvious one.
Exactly, because of her faith. So a part of the answer was given in the story summary, as Sherry just mentioned, and that is, it was Missy's faith that gave her the strength to endure that situation. Now, Missy's reaction to the death of her husband Matthew reminds me of my reaction to the passing of my mother, to give a personal example. Now, this is my mother. Her name is Minnie. As a matter of fact, that's what I called her coming up. I called her Minnie. But this month in January represents the 30th anniversary of her passing. She passed in January of 1993. My brother Alvin just texted me a couple of days ago saying that he also remembered her anniversary, 30th anniversary of her passing. But he said it was the 4th. I was thinking it was the 3rd of January. But anyway, it's been all these years since then that I feel that she's been with us. At least she's been with me in spirit. Now, it's something that I don't necessarily understand, and most people, I guess, don't understand the concept of death. But let's look at Proverbs, the 3rd chapter, the 5th verse and the 6th verse. And this is what it says. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. And be not wise in your own eyes. And so I'm certainly not necessarily wise in my own eyes in this case because, as I said, I don't understand it whenever you say that someone who has gone on is still present in spirit. That's kind of difficult to get and to understand. But when you have this trust, as far as what the scripture says about it, while you may not understand, it will lead to the peace that's talked about in Philippians. And God can give us the grace to deal with such a sad situation despite our limited faith, because I certainly didn't have that much faith at that time back in 93. Not that I have a lot of it now, but we're all in the process of growth, and certainly I have more than I had back in 1993. But still, I was given the grace to deal with that particular situation of my mother's passing. And I didn't understand it, but I felt a lot of peace that I didn't think I would feel given the loss of my mother. I mean, of course, I had grown up with her, and I just couldn't think or fathom of her passing on during the early years. But when the time finally came when she did pass, I felt that I did have the peace. And again, maybe because of limited faith, it's not because of the great faith I had, but because of the grace of God, I was able to endure that situation and have the peace. So it was peace that was what it was all about at that time. Now, an example of the peace I'm talking about is in the biblical story of David and his dying son. And most of you probably are familiar with this particular story. David's son was ill, and he was in the process of dying, David felt. And so David prayed to God to have his son continue to live. But God didn't answer David's prayer, and his son died. And but this didn't diminish David's faith in God. With David's associates watching his emotions the whole time, David went ahead and started preparing for his next assignment as the king. And so I'm sure there was a limited time of grieving that David had, but for the most part, once he saw that God was not going to let his son live at that time, basically what he said was that I'm going to go to him. And again, his associates were amazed that they could not understand the fact that they could not understand David's actions after seeing how much he desired to have his son live. And as I was getting ready to say, David said in effect that God is sovereign and I can't bring my son back, but one day I'll go to him. So I forget what scripture that story is in. So we see here that David's associates certainly didn't understand his actions, because obviously they didn't have the faith in God that David had. And the result of David's faith was him being in peace in that very negative situation, the death of his son. Well, you certainly need to be prepared, and that will allow for peace. I remember when I was teaching, I prepared for my lessons, and whenever I was prepared to teach, I had the peace. In other words, I didn't have any apprehension as far as going in and giving a lecture. But on the other hand, if I wasn't prepared, then I didn't have the peace. And then sometimes God simply gives us the grace, and we get peace that way. And that's what happened with the passing of my mother. Not that I had a lot of faith at that time, but he gave me the grace to have the peace in that very negative situation. And so since Minnie's passing, as I said, I felt her presence in the spirit. But it's very difficult to understand, and I don't understand a lot of it. But I'm simply going on what the scripture says about it, that her spirit continues to live. Now, I feel that God gives us signs that our loved ones are still present with us in spirit, even though we don't understand. He will do that. And I feel that he gave me a sign of my mother's presence. And this happened to come in a dream. I remember, I think it was about maybe 2 or 3 years ago, within the span of 3 or 4 days, I had it may have been 3 dreams where I dreamed that I was in a room and the door opened and she came in the door and we embraced, and that's when I woke up. It was a very happy moment. And you know how dreams are. Dreams seem to be so real. And then a night or 2 later, I had a similar dream. It may have been in another room, but again, she came through the door, and I knew it was her. And she smiled. She came toward me, and we embraced. And that's when I woke up. And so I feel that was a sign that she's still present, because I didn't or haven't had that kind of dream since, or even before. So I think that was an instance when apparently you might say, or I believe that she decided to make her presence known in the form of a dream. So we don't have to worry about our loved ones, the ones that have passed on. And like Mitzi in our story, she didn't have a spirit of worry, having lost her husband. And again, it goes back to Philippians 4th chapter and the 6th verse about us not being anxious about anything. And but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, presenting our requests to God. And in verse 7, it tells you the results if you do this. And the results happen to be the peace of God, which it goes on to say transcends all understanding. Okay, so, and I'm sure before I give you all a chance to make a comment, you remember the biblical story in the Gospel of Matthew about Jesus quiets the storm. But before he did that, he was sleeping. I really wanted to ask you if you knew what he was doing, if you're familiar with the story, but this is what it says here. He was sleeping, and you're probably familiar with the story. But the point is that he was in peace. He was in peace in the midst of a storm while his disciples were upset, and actually they were wondering why he was so calm when they thought that their lives were in danger. And so a common message of this particular story is that Jesus will quiet the storms in our lives. This is one way you can look at it. But another message in this story is that we can have the peace that Jesus had in the midst of a storm. If we're not anxious in troublesome situations, and that definitely was a troublesome situation, the disciples being in a boat in a raging storm. Any comments on what we've been talking about so far? Okay, just one.
Well, I was listening to what you're saying about your mom passing, and when we have loved ones that pass away like that who are very close to us, and we have those memories, and those memories are so vivid to us that it's as though that they are yet with us, and we hold on to that. But we know our loved one has gone; it's not with us anymore. But those memories can be so vivid. I remember when my mom passed, and later on I was getting ready to cook something, and I couldn't exactly remember how. And I said, let me call Mom and ask her. And then I stopped because I realized Mama's gone. But it was so real, like she was still with me, that I was going to go and pick up the phone and call her. And then I had to stop and say, no, present time, she's gone. She's gone. And I don't know about you, but we have had a lot of deaths in our church family lately. Wow. Just a lot of funerals in the past 3 months, I would say. It seems like just a lot. And to me, it has really had me to stop and think about the finality of death. That when that person leaves here, they're gone. They're gone forever. And it makes me to stop and think about the finality of death. And certainly we know that we will go that way at some point as well. And that, we want to live so that we can live again.
Well, yeah, I think that's the key, that we will live again, but the dimension is different. So we, as you're familiar with, all of you all online tonight, familiar with the fact that we live in a flesh body, we're in a physical world, but there's also a spiritual aspect or dimension that we don't talk about as much. So that's very important too. But let me ask if anybody else want to chime in. Anybody else? Okay. So, but yeah, we have that peace which transcends understanding when we know that regardless of how you feel about death, and it's not a very popular subject to talk about, but we do have hope, and that's what the scripture talks to us about. The fact that even in a situation like a loved one passing on, even though, as you said, Ms. Jones, they're gone from this particular realm forever. But on the other hand, there is hope. So we need to remember that. And this is what gives us the peace in the midst of a storm, in a very troubling situation. And this is the peace that Missy had in our story when her husband Matthew passed, largely because of her faith. And it was a peace that Sandra just didn't have at the time. And Sandra didn't understand the peace that Missy had at such a low point in her life. So again, the question might be asked, why did Sandra lack the peace that Missy had? And we know that she didn't have the faith that Missy had. And that's the obvious answer. Sandra did not have the faith that Missy had. And this is true, but more specifically, what can we point to that led to Missy's strong faith? And again, this might be a little obvious, and we have actually touched on it before. So anybody want to hazard a guess as to what that one word might be? Actually, it's just one word. Anybody? And I see now that, oh yeah, okay, it's going. Now, it goes back to Philippians 4:6. And the answer. That will give us the answer. And that is, be anxious for nothing, but for everything through prayer and petition, make your request be made known to God, is the remainder of that particular verse. And but Sandra was anxious, and Missy was not. And I recently looked at the definition of being anxious, and this is what the dictionary, or I may have looked online and saw the definition of anxious. And that is, anxious is to experience worry, unease, or nervousness, typically about an event that is about to happen, or something with an uncertain outcome. And obviously that's what death is about. As even my mother used to say, well, no one has been there to tell us what it's like. And so that uncertainty is certainly something that can make you anxious. And this is what Sandra felt. So, and also, before we make our final comments, as far as Sandra is concerned, let me just say, as we all now know probably, that she was worried, she was uneasy, she was nervous, she was a mental wreck at the passing of Matthew. So she wasn't, and certainly she didn't have a peace. And of course, this is what Galatians tells us in the New Testament, 5:22, I believe, 22 and 23, that that faith that I've been talking about gives us the peace that otherwise we couldn't understand.
I think the lesson that you have brought forth tonight is just about having faith in times like these, and we really do need that. The situation might not be death, but we know there are so many things that are happening in our world now, and we have to stay in that place of peace so that we're not anxious and experiencing all kinds of difficulties because of it. So our faith will keep us in times of distress. If we keep our minds stayed on Him, He'll keep us in perfect peace.
That's true. That's true. Anyone else want to echo what Ms. Jones just mentioned? And of course, that's why we have the Word. That's why we go to church, and the assumption is that you go and get the Word from whatever church you go to, or even if you don't go to church, if you you may be a part of a television ministry or some other kind of ministry, because especially during this time of social media, you have the word being expressed in several ways. Traditionally, of course, it was basically the church and at home. Hopefully you would get it at home, but if you didn't, at least you could go to church. But now you can get it almost 24/7 because of social media. You have podcasts, so you have a lot of ways, and you also always have the scripture. You can simply read the word. So anyway, any other final comments that anyone would like to make? Okay, I want to announce that next week we will be, well, I shouldn't say next week, I mean next month. Our February meeting will be the 4th of the month, 4th day of the month, which is the first Saturday. And we will still be in the book Heaven Can't Wait, or Can It? The sequel. And the title of the story for the February meeting is On Losing Matthew, Part 2. Matthew's New Life in the Spirit. And it's the second story in chapter 7, On the Beach. And we're still in pages 115 to 121 if you want to catch up on the reading. And the theme of our meeting in February will be Life in the Spirit. So hopefully it'll be a little bit more uplifting than, I guess, what the subject matter was tonight. But it's some things we have to at least touch on before we move on. I like to give props to the individuals responsible for making this book club possible. And these are the book club development credits. And if you'd like to contact any one of these individuals to have them do whatever kind of work that they can do for you, feel free to contact them. And if you didn't get all the information here, you can always go to my website, williamporterlife.com, and get all the information you need, the same information as you see here. Of course, I'd like to thank the voiceover specialists, Ms. Jones, Sherwin Sharp, Deborah Agamwabi, and Jonah Kuttner. Our technician is also a voiceover specialist. So if you know of anyone who would like to join us the next time, just have them email me at waporter4995@yahoo.com, and I will give them a Zoom ID and a passcode. And an encouraging word for the month, and this is another new segment that I've incorporated in the New Inspirational Book Club. And the encouraging word for the month of January is this: sincerely believe John 11:26, which says that whosoever lives and believes in me shall never die. And again, that is to say, the spirit part of the person will never die. So thank you for your attendance. And again, if I had not expressed it, and I believe I did express it earlier, but Happy New Year anyway, and hope that all your plans and whatever you'd like to do in 2023 will come about. So I'd like to let you know that there's always more good things coming your way. So think positive. All right, take care, everybody. See you next time in February. Have a nice evening. We hope that all of you had a good meeting today, and we really look forward to seeing you next month. And my contact information is on the screen if you'd like to contact me. And before we leave, I'd like to close with this. Whatever you may be going through, whether it's good or bad, just keep this in mind, that there's always more good things coming your way. We'll see you the next time. All right.